All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're very excited to have you here today for Alphabet Soup Showdown, Decoding Legal Acronyms in Public Interest Law. I'm not going to introduce all of our speakers first. I'm going to introduce them on the go as we start talking about the categories, but just some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. You're going to receive a copy of the recording via Zoom in about 24 hours. We're also going to be posting it on YouTube where you're going to be able to access the CLE code, all the materials, and some other resources that we've compiled. The training was approved by the Florida Bar for one General CLE Credit. I'll share that code towards the end. I actually have it on one of the slides as well. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility or the captions, you can reach out to me directly. This training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, or PILS. And if you're not familiar with PILS, I'll also make sure to include some of the information for their website. You can check out all of our working groups and our committees as well. And this webinar is going to be interactive. We're going to have a quiz portion, so be on the lookout for that chat. Make sure to type in what your answers are. We're not going to use the typical polls because we want to be able for people to see those answers as they come in. So with that said, I'm going to copy a fact scenario here that I have on my notes because I'm going to drop it into the chat soon. But let's get started. I'm going to be your host today. So I'm going to do a lot of talking. I'm not used to doing this much talking, but I'm going to have to act as a host. Let's see how it goes. As you know, I'm the director with the Statewide Training Initiative with FLS for the legal services. I am also on the executive council for PILS, and that's another acronym for another day. And I'll if anybody knows what that means, drop it into the chat. I want to test your knowledge, not legal knowledge. That's more like a cultural knowledge. But moving on to the next one. Game rules, each topic, we're gonna have a team captain and we're gonna spend about 10 minutes per topic. So when we get to that quiz portion, I'm gonna ask you to drop the answer into the chat. We're gonna try to move fast because we have a lot of acronyms. We're not gonna be able to cover every possible acronym, but we'll do our best. So I'm gonna drop an acronym and I'm gonna use FLS as an example. We see Sandy posted for the legal services, and I'll explain here's what Florida Legal Services is, and we move on to the next topic. So that's kind of the way this is going to flow, and then each team captain is going to have it's basically going to have the opportunity to do a showcase and discuss some key topics that come up. All right, so those are the rules. Here is a carefully crafted case note that I came up with. And we may see this, this is me 10 years ago doing probably one of my first intakes. And here I'm going to try to read it just as it comes in. Bob needs help. Bob's, whatever that means, wants to leave and take the kids to another state after she found out he is heavily in debt. MF is suing. Who is MF? I don't know. Bob is considering BK. He may be hungry. He is considering Burger King. He's expecting about $10,000 soon from a PI case. He wants to know how this will impact his SS. So I refer Bob to NASCAR because I've heard some people talk about NASCAR and when it comes to Social Security benefits, so I refer him to NASCAR for whatever reason, right? So Bob is behind in his rent and he lives in HUD housing. So that's basically all he told us. And his lender wants to evict, so I refer him to LA. And that LA, I don't know if it's legal aid, Los Angeles, I don't know. So I'm just putting some acronyms out there, and we're going to get into each topic right now, and we're going to start with our first category, which is the consumer category, and we have our team captain, Adam Thoresen. And Adam, I'm going to ask you to answer a few quick questions. So let's start with JALA. Tell me about JALA.
JALA, Jacksonville Area Legal Aid, the best legal aid in Northeast Florida. You have to fight me in the comments for that one.
Which, by the way, you will see that in these slides. You're going to be able to find the links to these organizations and find their website. So we already have Sandy fighting you, Adam.
That's right. So we got NACA then. That's the National Association of Consumer Advocates. If you do any kind of consumer work, I'd strongly recommend joining up. The listservs alone are worth the price of admission. Next one there, we got PILS, Public Interest Law Section. PILS has a great consumer and tenant subcommittee. Jorge is involved. I'm involved. It's a great way to get involved with bar sections if you'd like to do that.
So Adam, let's go back to Bob, and we mentioned that Bob is heavily in debt, and MF wants to sue. Who's that MF, or who is that? Does that sound
Yeah,
ring a bell?
yeah, that MF. So that's Midland funding, and we might call them other things under our breath, but Midland funding is a very common debt buyer. So if you're screening these cases, doing intakes, even if you don't do consumer work, you might see tons of cases by Midland funding, and then BK, of course, that is bankruptcy.
All right. So yeah, I love that BK one because I really thought my boss really liked Burger King because I saw it on his schedule all the time, almost every day, and it was just basically a time slot that would be saved for bankruptcy consults. So that's how I learned. And one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar is that some of us have experience, others don't, and sometimes we just don't want to ask, right? So if you see these acronyms, if you don't know what they mean or what they are, always feel free to ask. So ready for the audience quiz. So let's get started. If anybody knows, drop into the chat. What is FDCPA? Let's give it a few more seconds, and I have a few answers. We have Federal Debt Collection Protection Act, and we have Fair Debt Credit Protection Agency. We have Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Adam, do any of those ring a bell? Or any of those correct?
Yeah, so anyone that said Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, you've got it right. That's a federal law. It was actually passed in 1977, so that's a common theme. A lot of these laws have been around longer than you think. And the key takeaway, I guess, for everybody with the FDCPA is right there in the name. So you must be a debt collector for this law to apply to you. So it does not apply to original creditors. You got a client being sued by Bank of America for a Bank of America card. It doesn't apply. And one of my favorite things about the FDCPA is the statutory preamble. And so a lot of times judges say, hey, we don't know what a law means, but they've told us right here. So they say there is abundant evidence of abusive, deceptive, and unfair uh, acts by many debt collectors, and abusive debt collection contributes to personal bankruptcies, marital instability, loss of jobs, invasion of individual privacy. And I think that's really cool to cite in your cases.
All right, so another one similar to FDCPA. Let's take a look at the next one. So does anybody know what FCCPA means? It's like a normal consumer law conversation, whether you may have an FCCPA claim or an FDCPA claim. So let's see if anybody wants to take a stab at that one in the chat. And we have the first one, Florida's Consumer Collection Practices Act. Which, by the way, quick disclaimer: I sometimes I know these acronyms, but as time passes, I only use the acronym and I totally forget what it means. So I'm totally relying on Adam here to correct to provide the correct answer. So Adam, is that one correct? Florida's
Yep,
Consumer Collection Practices Act.
that's exactly right. So that's the Florida Consumer Collection Practices Act. The meat of this one is 55972, and that's the prohibited practices. And basically, the easy way to remember this one, it's just the state law analog of the FDCPA. But the great news about the FCCPA is it does apply to original creditors because the law says any person that violates this law is liable. So this is kind of the bread and butter of consumer claims in Florida. And this is common to all the acronyms we're going to talk about today. Again, just a little knowledge nugget to tuck away. All of these only apply to consumer lending. So if someone comes in, they bought a truck for their business, none of these laws apply. It's all about consumers.
All right. Moving on to the next one. Let's see what we have. We have FCRA. Anybody want to take a guess here in the chat? What does FCRA stand for? Saying it out loud. I'm not saying it out loud, saying it in my head. And we have the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Fair, yeah, we have multiple Fair Credit Reporting Act. I think this one was one of the easier ones. Is
Yeah.
that accurate, Adam?
Yep, that's exactly right. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, this one is passed in 1970. It's 15 USC 1681. So again, it's been around a while. But I guess the news flash here is even though the name says Fair Credit Reporting Act, the main way I'm using this in my practice is tenant screening reports. So it does not only apply to credit reports, it applies to background reports for employment, for tenant admissions. And so, if you're a legal aid attorney and you're dealing, even in the housing context, you got people being turned down for stuff on their tenant screening that's not theirs, you need to at least be familiar with the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
All right. And this next one, I see Jody's here. So Jody's knows how I've struggled with this so many times where I've tried to mention this and I always say CFPB or something else and I end up saying an agency. So does anybody know what CPFB stands for? And Sandy, you're on fire. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But Sandy, I don't know if this counts as the host. I may take off some points because there is a typo because we have Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So, as the host, I have to be fair. So I don't know. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I thought this may be a trick question, but it is in fact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they're basically tasked with enforcement and regulation of the financial services industry. It's unclear if anyone's there right now. We've all seen the news, but I will say this, just to plug, it's a great way for your clients to make complaints. They are still taking complaints online, and there is also a database of complaints, past complaints, and that can be really helpful data. You can look up and see, okay, how many people have complained about, SPS for mortgage servicing, and you can see the nature of those complaints. So everyone should be familiar with the CFPB.
All right, and let's see what we have next. So this is going to be our consumer showcase. And when Adam sent me this, I had no idea what EFTA and SCBA means. Do know a little bit about the Truth in Lending Act, but Adam, take it away. Talk to us about this topic.
All right. So the reason I wanted to make this little plug is TILA is kind of a granddaddy statute, and there's lots of parts and subparts, and regulates everything from open and closed end credits to mortgage servicing. But two acronyms I wanted to make sure people were familiar with are the FCBA, which is the Fair Credit Billing Act, and also the EFTA, which is the Electronic Funds Transfer Act. And the reason I think these two statutes are so important is number one, the rise in what I'll call sort of sweetheart scams or Lothario scams, where a lot of times elderly folks might be duped into transactions with people pretending to be someone that they're not, and they're losing large amounts of money. And we get these intakes and we say, oh my gosh, what can we do about that? And the EFTA is a great way to deal with that. So the EFTA basically deals with debit card transactions or other transactions out of banking and checking accounts. And then the FCBA, the Fair Credit Billing Act, deals with the same type of unauthorized use of credit card accounts. And again, ID theft, data breaches are on the rise. People all the time have their credit cards or debit cards hacked. And so you'll have people come in, I didn't make these charges, my credit card company won't take it off. And there are actually tools out there that can help. And I guess, again, I don't want to eat up all the time, but the one plug on these two statutes is be thinking, if your client pushed the button to transfer the money or make the purchase, that's bad. You're probably dead on arrival. You probably don't have a claim. However, if your client was tricked into giving up the keys of the castle, gave control of their computer, gave a password to somebody through deception, and that's how the transfer was made, you probably got a claim.
All right, and this is why you should join Pills and join that consumer tenant work group and talk to people like Adam. Like Adam joins these meetings and he always brings a lot of knowledge. We're discussing these type of, these are high level topics, and when Adam brings that to the table, what's happening. So please take a look at Pills. and consider joining that work group if you want to learn more about landlord tenant consumer law, because these are the type of high level conversations that are had. So thank you, Adam. I know Adam may need to jump off at some point, so I may call on you at some point again. But with that said, we're gonna move on to our next category, and that's with Christina Russo Walters, and she is the Public Benefits Team Captain. And I have multiple acronyms here. I have CLS, MLP, CFAL. Then let's go ahead and Russo, talk to me. What's CLS?
Hey, Jorge. So CLS is the nonprofit legal aid here in Central Florida. It stands for Community Legal Services, which is short for our old acronym CLS-MF, Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. And there I am. I'm just going to keep going. There I am, the senior managing attorney of MLPs, which is Medical Legal Partnerships. And that's an upstream approach to healthcare where we embed advocates into the healthcare team to remove the health harming legal needs and address the health harming legal needs. And we also often refer to those as, you'll hear, SDOH, which is social determinants of health. So throwing out some extra acronyms at you all. And I've also recently become president of CFAL, which is the Central Florida Association for Women Lawyers. And we are a professional organization dedicated to promoting the advancement and recognition of women within the profession by expanding leadership and volunteer opportunities within Central Florida community. And the last
On
one you have
CFAL.
there, go
Let
ahead.
me quick interruption. Speaking of CFAL, can you talk a little bit about the upcoming luncheon that you have? Kind of do a quick plug if anybody's in the Central
Thanks
Florida
for letting
area.
me do my shameless plug. As president, I have my first luncheon this Friday at the Citrus Club. So if you find yourself in Central Florida and want to come join us, I'm happy to have you join us.
Nice. The last one I mentioned, Bob was referred to NASCAR or something like that. So I remember reading this all the time when I first started at Legal Aid. So tell us about NASCAR. What's NASCAR?
I I actually was very confused also the first time I heard somebody say the word NOSCAR because I too thought NASCAR and was like, that makes zero sense. And sometimes if you Google search it, you actually get NASCAR pops up. So just pay attention to that. But NOSCAR is the National Organization of Social Security Claimant Representatives. And it's a bar association for advocates of Social Security claimants. They provide all sorts of researches, technical assistance, research, training, all sorts of stuff.
All right, so let's get to the quiz portion. And the first one is TANF. Anybody in the chat wants to drop like what if they know or want to guess what TANF means? I think I know what it means. And Glorianne pulled the trigger really quickly. We have temporary assistance for needy families, and that's the one that keeps coming up. Is that accurate, Christina? Temporary
They,
assistance for needy families.
they are right. Temporary assistance for needy families. And this is a program designed to help families with children experiencing low income achieve self-sufficiency and stability. And here in Florida, we actually call it TCA, which is temporary cash assistance.
All right, let's look at the next one. And we have SNAP. Oh, SNAP. Is that how we use this? Oh, SNAP. SNAP. What does SNAP mean? Anybody in the chat want to take a guess? We have Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's another one.
And that is correct. I was waiting to see if we got any other answers, but that is correct. I'm going to throw a couple other acronyms at you here. So SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is formerly food stamps, and this provides food benefits to low-income families to support their grocery budget. It's overseen by the USDA, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but administered by the states. And so here in Florida, that's done by DCF, which is the Department of Children and Families.
I love how we keep using acronyms on top of acronyms. So, all right,
Figured
let's
I'd
see.
add in the extra ones I had.
Let's take a look at POMS. I remember reading this one for the first time, and I still don't know what it. I think I know what it means. I know what it's. I don't know what it stands for. But let's see if any of our Social Security folks know what POMS means.
I actually had to look up to make sure I had the right words. Because like you, I know what it is. It was just, what does it actually stand for?
This one is one
No
of the
guesses?
higher level ones. This is one of the harder ones. So I'm waiting on the chat to see if anybody wants to try to answer this. That's why I came up with a 30-second rule because we might have time to Google it. And we have Program Operations Manual.
Close. So it's the
Very
program
close.
operations manual system. I don't know why what the system is there. But this is basically Social Security's primary manual for policies and procedures for their field offices. And so when have a Social Security case, we have the regulations that we have to refer to, but also go back to the POMs to see how the actual field agents are handling are interpreting those regulations.
All right. Let's see what we have next. And we have CHIP. Let's see if anybody in the chat wants to try to guess or state what CHIP means. And we have Children's Health Insurance Program. We have two
Glorian
people
must
answer the
do
same.
public benefits.
Oh yeah, we may have a CHIP
I think she
training
might
with
be
Gloria.
cheating. Oh, there we go. See? So, yes, CHIP is the Children Health Insurance Program, and it provides health insurance to children and families whose incomes are too high to qualify for Medicaid, but too low to qualify for the subsidies through the ACA, Affordable Care Act.
And we see, by the way, Gloria is disclaiming that she did not know POMS, so see, this is what we're learning
Right?
here
We
today.
all know what it is. We all know it's the policy book, but it's like, what does that actually stand for?
Yeah, and kind of going back to consumer law, it feels like in consumer law, you put any like 5 letters together and you have a consumer cause of action. So it's just, you never know what you're going to get. And sometimes we get these repeat acronyms that could mean different things in different areas of law as well. So let's take one more here. We have EOB. Anybody want to guess what EOB stands for? I think I know what it means, but I'm not gonna. We have explanation of benefits, multiple explanation of benefits. Russo,
Yes, and
is
that's
that accurate?
correct. This is more of a common knowledge, I think, acronym, more well known outside of the legal community as well. But it's a document from your health insurance provider that shows how your health claim was processed and shows what the charges were, who paid what, so what your plan paid, what you paid, what you still owe. Um, and it's important when we're looking at these to determine whether or not things like Medicaid covered things as they were supposed to.
All right, and let's kind of go to our showcase. And I left this one is one of the more basic ones that we probably see in public benefits world, but it's I think one of the most important distinctions. And we have SSI versus SSDI. And I'm gonna pass it on to Russo, but if anybody wants to put in the chat what SSI means or they know, and same thing for SSDI, go ahead. But Russo, the floor is yours.
So SSI and SSDI are administered by SSA. So SSA is the Social Security Administration. And when somebody tells you that they have Social Security benefits, as Jorge mentioned, it is a big difference between SSI and SSDI. So SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income, and it is a means tested benefit. It is for folks who are aged, blind, or disabled. So someone over 65 could qualify based on being elderly and then also of low income. There are income and resource limits to SSI. And the maximum benefit someone can receive this year is $967. This goes up every year with the cost with another acronym, the COLA, the cost of living adjustment. I actually didn't have that one written down. And SSI comes with Medicaid. So SSDI, on the other hand, is for folks who are disabled. It also potentially can pay out benefits to the spouse, former spouse, or child of a disabled worker. And I mentioned workers, so it's for folks who have a history of work. And so where SSI is a means tested benefit, SSDI, you had to have paid into the system through your Social Security payroll taxes. And then SSDI also comes with Medicare benefits instead of Medicaid. But those are paid out actually 2 years after the benefit starts and not right away. Like with SSI, Medicaid can start right away. Somebody can have both benefits at the same time if their SSDI is below the SSI maximum, but they would never have SSI if they're over $967, which is this year's max.
So kind of going back, you mentioned the max. What is it right now? 960 for SSI?
967 for an individual.
967. So if you see if you're qualifying somebody and you see an intake where it says that Bob is earning $1,600 in SSI, how is that a red flag in this case? What do you think that could possibly mean?
It's likely that the intake worker just mixed it up and that it's SSDI, or that the client doesn't know and just thinks it's disability benefits, automatically SSI. The other distinction is SSDI is the same title benefit as retirement. So Title 16 is SSI, retirement and SSDI both fit under Title 2.
And Elizabeth actually commented in the chat something that we see all the time. Like it gets very confusing, and sometimes even the clients don't understand which benefit they have. So they will tell you like, "This is what I have," and that's basically what we need to sometimes break down, right?
Right. And I think that what Jorge just mentioned is a really good way of helping to differentiate. If they're over that $967 as an individual, you know it can't be SSI. They have to have SSDI. If it's only $967, usually they'll have two checks if they're getting both, or it'll just be SSI. Another thing that you can ask about is their work history. So if they have a really spotty work history or no work history, they can't have SSDI because they'll not have the credits required.
We do have a question here that I was kind of planning to bring it up towards the end again, but I'm gonna kind of throw it out there. And can you please explain how draconian the economic limits are with SSI?
Well, yeah, so SSI is reduced based on any income that you have. We have another acronym, which is SGA, Substantial Gainful Activity. And so that's a work limit. If you're working at substantial gainful activity, you're automatically not disabled. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what that dollar amount is at the moment, but it's not very much. It's around $1,200, I think. But even if you're working under that, your income reduces your SSI amount. Included in income is also support. And so if you live with somebody and you're not paying rent and you're not paying for your own food, your benefit amount can also be reduced, and it's usually reduced by up to a third. And then there was a question about the marriage penalty I saw drop in the chat too. And I think what you're referring to is that if two individuals with SSI get married, the benefit amount that they receive in total actually is reduced because the maximum benefit amount for a couple is lower than what the two individual amounts equal. And I don't have that number in front of me either, and I don't want to mistakenly say what the wrong thing is. So, but it's less than twice the individual amount.
And part of this, one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar this way is like we probably need webinars, like standalone webinars on all these topics to kind of cover the basics because it gets complicated and there's a lot of rules. So you'll see how we're going to circle back towards the end to Bob's example and how a settlement, money coming in could have an impact on mean tested benefits. Okay, so with that said, let's move on to the next category. And we have Sean Rowley. He's our housing team captain. He's with LSGMI and with HUD. So with that said, I'm gonna ask Sean, talk to me about LSGMI, whatever that means, the second one, and HUG, and we're gonna get into ERA or ERAP towards the end. So let's get started with LSGMI. Sean, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sean Rowley. So yes, LSGMI is Legal Services of Greater Miami. That's the organization I work for. It's the largest provider of assistance to the low-income community, not just for tenants' rights and housing issue, but also consumer, public benefits, and issues like that. So it's a great organization. So Reptile is a real property, probate, and trust law section. It's a section of the Florida Bar. It has more than 10,000 members. It puts on a lot of really great trainings and puts out a lot of really great information, so you should look into joining. HUG is the housing umbrella group, and our host and myself are the two co-chairs of it. It's a listserv. It's an umbrella group for different tenants' rights housing advocates throughout Florida. We meet every second Thursday, so you should look into getting in on our listserv if you're not already. We do things like amicus briefs and things like that. And then ERA and ERAP are oh wait, am I supposed to say that, or is that part of the
Oh,
quiz?
let's take
Okay,
it.
okay,
Let's ask our audience because here's
okay.
what I'm gonna quick story. Like I was talking with Sean and I are planning this segment, and I'm saying ERA, and he's like, "What is ERA?" I'm like, "Well, it's not like if you like baseball, it's earned run average, but." To me, ERA means one thing, and I kept saying ERA, and he said ERAP. I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, it's the same thing. So basically, it stands for, most people know, it's Emergency Rental Assistance Program. But in my case, I guess maybe being a baseball fan, I would always call it ERA. But I've kind of thought about it, and a lot of people call it ERAP. So that's kind of the behind the scenes of the story. So we were wondering what people called it. If you want to throw it into the chat, which one do you prefer? Because this is our official hug battle of of this webinar. So let's see if anybody has a preference for ERA or ERAP. I don't know if you remember those days. Most of the ERA or ERAP funds are done, but just wanted to do that quick plug. And by the way, going back to, on purpose, I didn't say it out loud. Reptiles, that's what the section is called, and they're totally okay with us saying reptile. It's the same thing with pills. When we say public interest law section, we have pills. That's how we refer to it. So it seems like the winner of the hug battle is Sean, because we do see only one vote here for emergency rental assistance program. So I'm gonna pass this one to Sean, and just yeah, ERAP keeps winning. So I guess we're gonna have to hug it out, Sean, and just
All right,
continue to be
great. Yeah, yeah.
co-chairs.
Well, I
And I'm
thought,
gonna give you deference to it. So
yeah, when you said ERA, I was thinking of the Equal Rights Amendment that failed like in the 1970s. um, um, but anyway, yeah. So I've always called it ERAP. So we actually do have ERAP right now in Miami-Dade County. They're making their last payments by the end of July, and it's gone. But I know most places it's been out for a long time. So
oh yeah. All right. So let's move on to the next one. And this one should be easy, but let's see if anybody knows what this stands for. I heard somebody say Frota during a meeting. I was like, what does that even mean? But I'm gonna give you a hint. We have chapter 83 in there, so if you do any landlord tenant law, see if anybody in the chat knows what Frota means or Frota. I'm not sure how we would pronounce it, but this is one of the longer acronyms, so I don't see any guesses, Sean. So if you want to go ahead and give us the answer for what Feralta means, and a lot of
um,
you probably know this, it's just that you never thought about it. So what's the answer, Sean?
it's the Florida Residential Landlord Tenant Act. Yeah, I mean, I don't use it a lot. I don't call it FROLTA a lot. But yeah, I mean, Chapter 83 is the basic landlord tenant law that applies to residential tenancies in Florida. I mean, there's another section that applies to commercial tenancies as well, but we deal with the Residential Landlord Tenant Act at Legal Services all the time. So
There we go. So I think if we say chapter 83, most people would know what we were talking about. So that's why we
right.
kind of wanted to throw you a curveball here. Okay, so let's look at the next one. If you see a note that says MHP, what does anybody think that means? Bob lives in an MHP, mobile home park. We have Jody with mobile home park. There we go, mobile home park. And sometimes we have mobile home owners, we have the mobile home park, we may have the home park act. So that's 723. Sean, is that accurate? Mobile home park? Is that typically what that means?
Yes, yes. So of course there are separate statutes that govern residential tenancies and mobile home parks. So if you own a mobile home, you're renting the land from the park. And if you're a mobile home owner and the park is evicting you, Chapter 723 applies. Now, if you don't own the home and you're renting the mobile home from the mobile home park owner, then FROLTA or Chapter 83 would apply. So sometimes Chapter 83 applies in the mobile home context, but you have to be renting. If you own the home and are renting the land, then Chapter 723 applies.
And I know in Bob's fake scenario, I put in like Bob lives in HUD housing, but if I were to put in Bob lives in an MHP, I'm telling you Bob lives in a mobile home park. But just kind of a quick tip, whenever you're documenting these notes, it's really helpful for attorneys like Sean to be able to say, like, Bob rents a lot and owns a home in a mobile home park, or Bob lives in a mobile home park. So Bob rents a mobile home at a mobile home park, because that's really going to help the attorneys distinguish between, okay, which one could apply here, whether it's Chapter 83 or FROTA or Chapter 723. So let's see what the next one is here. We have MTDR. We see this on case notes all the time when we're dealing with our evictions. So any of our eviction people here, does anybody know what does MTDR stand for? And Jody, that was fast. Some of our CLS people, it seems like they use it a lot. I remember seeing that on the case notes a lot. So motion to determine rent. Sean, is that accurate?
Yes, yes, that is accurate. So, when you're served with an eviction complaint, it's not enough to file just an answer. If you just file an answer, you could be defaulted. You also have to post the rent money that's due into the court registry or assert payment. If you're disputing the amount alleged by the landlord, you have to file a motion to determine rent along with your answer. And that leads a lot of people to be defaulted because they only file an answer and they don't realize they have to file that motion.
All right, so pay to play stuff here. And we have WAP. We see this on the case notes all the time. So this one is usually really alarming. Does anybody know what this stands for in the chat? Yeah, writ of possession, writ. It's if you get that client calling for the first time and they're like, "Hey, I'm sending a case note to Sean saying like, hey, this client just called. They've been served with a WAP." It's usually they've been served with a writ of possession. Is that accurate, Sean?
Yes, it's writ of possession. So this is what we don't want to see because it's after there's already a final judgment of eviction. And if clients are coming into our office at this stage, it's really, really late in the game. Usually, most writ of possessions will say 24-hour notice because the sheriff's office can return 24 hours later to execute the writ, which is when they're actually physically dispossessing the family. So oftentimes you'll hear people say 24-hour notice, and they're going to be referring to the writ of possession that's been posted on their door.
All right. And let's go ahead and talk about our showcase. This is something that we see all the time. And we go really similar with the Social Security conversation earlier. A lot of the clients don't necessarily know what benefit they have. This happens with housing all the time. And if anybody sees these acronyms, by the way, that we have in here, start dropping them into the chat if you know what they mean. But I mentioned in my example that Bob lives in HUD housing. And Sean brought that up. We see this all the time, right? So, Sean, talk to us about identifying the subsidies in some of these acronyms.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, like Jorge was saying, I mean, it's very often you ask what type of housing the tenant lives in because that's very important to determining the rules, and they don't know, and they just say HUD housing. I'm in HUD housing. And that doesn't really tell you a lot. So some of the major types of housing up there are, low-income housing tax credit. That's one of the unique types of, the developer gets tax credits for renting to people who are in a certain percentage of AMI or area median income. So, what's unique there is that rent there is not based on your income. It's based on the area median income. So if you lose your job, your rent's not going to go down. Public housing, that's where essentially the housing authority or the government is your landlord. HCV is a housing choice voucher. That's Section 8. It's most commonly referred to as Section 8. That's where you go out and use a voucher where you find a unit on the private market, rent at a private tenancy the same way a private tenant would, except the housing authority pays a portion and then you pay a portion based on your income and family composition. And then RAD and PBV, those are kind of pretty new for us in the past 5 to 10 years. And RAD is the rental assistance demonstration. That's where public housing is slowly going away, and it's converting to a different type of federally subsidized housing because public housing is crumbling and falling apart because Congress is not putting up the money to keep them up. So they're bringing in private developers to have an ownership interest to bring in their private development money to convert it from public housing to a quasi private owned type of subsidized housing. So that's what RAD is, or rental assistance demonstration. And most of that conversion of public housing through RAD is the housing becomes PBV or project-based vouchers. That's where it's it's a HAP contract, or where the voucher is actually attached to the unit. It's not like a housing choice voucher where you can take your voucher and use it somewhere else. You know, housing HCV, the subsidy stays with the tenant. PBV, the subsidy sticks to the unit. Now you can convert your PBV voucher to an HCV voucher after a certain period of time. But yeah, that's a quick rundown of the different types of housing.
We did see a comment here from Elizabeth on how we have a bunch of LIHTC properties, the low income tax credit properties here in St. John's, but not much of the others. And I think that's pretty common, right, Sean? Like that's probably the most popular type of subsidized housing in Florida.
Yes, yeah, and probably throughout the country. And like I mean, I think as we go forward, I think that's going to be the most prominent type of housing, because I think it's the most popular with policymakers, because it's not really subsidized. There's not federal dollars going into the program. It's more private developers getting tax breaks to rent to certain groups in AMI. So.
All right. So I know we're going a little bit over time, so I'm going to move it on to our next category. And we're going to move on to the family law category. And we have Tenesia Hall with us. She's going to be our family team captain. Tenesia's I don't want to say it out loud because this will be a spoiler, but I'm going to try to LASOCBA. I typically say LAS. And the second one, I'm not going to mention it because it's going to be part of what we're going to discuss next. So, Tenesia, the floor is yours. Talk to me about LASOCBA.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tenesia Hall. LASOCBA is my law firm. I'm with the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association. We provide family law services and a whole host of other civil legal services to low-income residents in Orange County, Florida. FLSFB, are we supposed to be taking guests for that right now, or do you want me to explain what that is?
Well, it's funny because when I did not know what it, I was like, let me just type it up, and I'm like, oh, FLS, that could be confusing. So tell us about what this is supposed to mean, Tunisia.
So at LASOCBA, or Legal Aid Society, I am the Family Law Litigation Director. For the Florida Bar Family Law section, which is here as FLSFB, because sometimes we reference it as FLS in the family law section world, which can be confusing in the legal aid world because FLS is this whole entity. So with the Florida Bar Family Law section, I am the chair-elect of this section. I will be the chair for the year 26-27. And so what I'm going to do is, I know we're supposed to give shout outs, and in the interest of time, I am just going to drop the link to our events. So in your chat, you will now see the link to all of the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association events on our events page. You will see the links to the Florida Bar Family Law section events page and the Orange County Bar Association events page, which is OCBA. OCBA is another acronym. We are a sister agency of the OCBA. So we have Legal Aid Society of the OCBA and then the OCBA. And I've given you links to all of their events. And then a lot of you, especially if you're doing family law here in the state of Florida, already know what VOCA is. And Carrie, you are dead on. It is the Victim of Crime Act. And the Victim of Crime Act is funding that allows for us at Legal Aid and the different legal aids to provide free legal services, free consultations, representation, safety planning to victims of crime. And that could be domestic violence, sexual assault, burglary, robbery, human trafficking, and domestic terrorism. If it's a crime, then it would qualify. And if it's related to the legal issue at hand, that is something that a client can be represented with through our VOCA funding, our Victim of Crime Act funding. And then Jorge introduced number 4 to me. So can anyone here tell me what number 4 is? STBEW.
Quick disclaimer, somebody else introduced it to me, and I think I tried to Google it and I couldn't find what it meant. I had to ask the person, but yeah, if anybody knows, please put it into the chat because I don't think this is common at all.
It is not, but it's I like it. It's cute. Okay,
So-
Mitchell. All right. So I will help you out. This is soon to be ex-wife. So one lawyer used this in their work, soon to be ex-wife. And we thought it would be interesting to put here. There you go, Wendy, you got it. Soon to be ex-wife. I like to use another acronym that is not on here, and not just I mean most family law practitioners use an acronym called RAIDS, Recently Acquired Income Deficiency Syndrome. And we deal a lot with that when we're dealing with child support and alimony, where individuals all of a sudden are making a third or a fourth of their income in hopes that their support obligations will be lessened. So that's it for the Talk to Me slide.
That's a great acronym, by the way. I'm like looking forward to seeing it in future notes. So let's start with an easy one for the audience. We have DOM. Let's see into the chat. That Glorian, like you were ready for this. I feel like you were ready for this before I even showed the slide. So yes, dissolution of marriage. Is that
Yes,
accurate, Tenesia?
that is correct. In Florida, we don't have divorces. We haven't had them in decades. We have dissolutions of marriage. And so one of the things I tell my clients, if it's not a dissolution of marriage, then it's normally a paternity action. And then our clients always get upset stating, I'm not arguing or debating paternity. I know I'm the father, or I know he's the father. And then we have to explain, generally the two common tracks for parenting cases would be under a dissolution of marriage action or a paternity action. Now, there are a few other types of cases that we could use, but for today's purposes, that is your DOM.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. We have peace. We've had trainings on this before we have a webinar called Peace, and this is something that comes up in family law all the time. So does anybody knows what peace stands for? If I try to take a stab at it, I'll probably get something wrong. So as I read it, I'm trying to yeah, I think I got it down, but let's see if anybody knows what this all stands for. And we have our first one. We have parenting, equitable distribution, alimony, child support, and everything else.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. PEACE is an acronym we use, especially in divorce cases, to help us determine the issues. And it's also an acronym that helps us determining the order in which the issue should be addressed. For instance, we have to know what the parenting plan is before we finalize the equitable distribution. We have to know what the equitable distribution is before we finalize the alimony, and so on and so forth, because the alimony will reduce the income available for child support, and then child support is set. And then everything else could be the restoration of the maiden name. It could be, transfer of property by use of court order. We could do a whole training on everything else. I think at last count, when I did an in-house training for my staff, it was like 13 or 14 different things that we can put under that E section.
Right, so let's look at the next one. We have gal. We may have a few gals in here, so we never know. And Gloria for the win again. Guardian ad litem. I think if we were keeping tab of the points, Gloria might win. Guardian ad litem. Tanisha, is that correct?
That is correct. And guardian ad litems, you can have guardian ad litems in different types of cases. So for us, we have domestic relations guardian ad litems or guardian ad litems in the parenting case. There can be a guardian ad litem assigned to a dependency case. You can also have a guardian ad litem when a child is a victim or victim witness in a criminal case. And on occasion, you can also have a guardian ad litem in a probate case. But for legal aids purposes, generally when we talk about GALs and we're not in the dependency program, we are talking about guardian ad litems in parenting cases.
All right, let's take a look at the next one, Quadro. This is one of my favorites because, quick story, one of my first client calls, the client asked me like, hey, do you guys help out with Quadro? So I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, let me put the client on hold. I'm like, what is a Quadro? And it's sometimes this happens when we're newer to the profession, like we don't know what the acronym stands for. Always make sure to ask. I see a lot of people do know the answer because they're dropping it into the chat. Qualified domestic relations order, which by the way, we recently had a great training on Quadros, and guess who connected me with that speaker? That was Tenesia. And we're gonna have a follow-up webinar on that topic. So first, Tenesia, thank you for connecting me with Carrie and the great people from the Quadro Center. And now let's talk about the qualified domestic relations order.
Yes, the qualified domestic relations order is an order that is needed to transfer the interest of one spouse's share in a retirement plan to the other spouse's share post-divorce without incurring any tax penalties. And some people think that it's as easy as drafting the quadro yourself and having the judge sign it. I always caution against that. Quadros are very specific. Employers are very specific as to what needs to be in the plan. I always suggest that you, if you have a quadro in your situation, that you touch base with a quadro expert in your community or the quadro trainers from the Quadro Training Center that we talked about earlier. Because in theory, like if it's Publix has a quadro the way they want it, and they're not going to take a quadro that's not the way they want it. If it's a governmental entity, they have certain things that have to be in their quadros. So quadros are kind of like a little specialized niche feel, and you want to make sure that you get the information that you need so that a quadro can actually be enforceable. There is a question, are there 4 quadro experts? There are multiple quadro experts. And of course, you have to be careful calling someone an expert in the state of Florida if they're not board certified, but yes. Oh, got you. Got you. All right.
And I'll make sure to include that webinar. We had that webinar recently, and we do have an upcoming webinar on quadros. So it's definitely one of these topics that we want to cover. So I see the pun now.
Yes.
Okay, so this one is a special one. DOR. Does anybody know what DOR means? And as a bonus category, I dropped in Asume. That's like one of the harder ones. But see, Department of Revenue, is that accurate, Tenesia? Department of Revenue?
Yes. And does anyone know what Asume is?
That's like high level. Well, we do have somebody saying child support, which is Oriana again for the win, Puerto Rico. So yes, it is the DOR version of in Puerto Rico. So if you ever have a client from Puerto Rico and they mention, hey, like I have dad or mom on Asume, that usually means, yeah, I have them on child support through DOR, which is the equivalent of Asume. I don't even know what Asume stands for anymore. I don't even think it's an acronym. It's kind of the short version of a really long name for the address for the office. So they figured let's just keep it at Asume, and that's it. So if you ever hear Asume, then that's what that means for DOR purposes. So there's going to be a plug for a webinar that we still haven't planned, but we're planning for Hispanic Heritage Month to do a redo of a webinar that was related to Spanish legal terms, not only for people in Puerto Rico, but from people from different Latino cultures. So be on the lookout for that. We actually have a name for it, and it's going to be called Debí Tomar Más CLEs, which is keeping that ongoing legal education. So be on the lookout for that. So I'm really glad that people actually knew the answer here. And Sandy, total nerd, this is gonna make up some points after the earlier typo. She had to look it up, so she did cheat. But Administración para el Sustento de Menores, they just turned all of that into Asume. So
Yes.
fun facts.
And the Department of Revenue, amongst a host of other things, they are tasked with running Florida's child support program. What a lot of individuals don't recognize is that there are contracted legal services providers for the Department of Revenue. So like in Orange County, we have the attorneys for DOR. In South Florida, the Attorney General's office contracts with them. It depends on your circuit, it depends on who is the actual contracted legal services provider. And just because there is a DOR case does not automatically mean there is a DOR attorney assigned to the case, because in order for that to happen, the DOR has to do a referral to the attorney for DOR or the legal services provider. So just because you have a client in front of you with a Title 4D DOR case, it doesn't absolutely mean that they currently have a referral or an attorney with the legal services provider for the DOR arm in your circuit.
All right, and one of my favorite ones, UCCJEA. This one is like one of the harder level ones. Now that I say it out loud, if you had me say the actual answer, I probably would get it wrong. I think I have it down, but we have Gloriana again with the Uniform Child Custody and Jurisdiction Enforcement Act. I'm not 100% sure if that's accurate. We see Wendy with the same answer. Tanisha, is that accurate?
That is accurate. UCCJEA is the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act. This is an act that lets your current jurisdiction know whether or not they have jurisdiction over the children. A lot of people use the guidepost of has the child been in the state for at least 6 months and is continuous 6 months prior to the date of filing. And is there any other child support order or time sharing order, custody order, visitation order related to that child? So the UCCJEA is an affidavit that has to be filed in every case involving children. and time sharing or temporary custody or something related to that, that states where that child has lived for the last 5 years, whether or not that child is subject to any child support order, whether anyone other than the parents are entitled to custody, visitation, or time sharing rights, and if so, when, whether there is a ongoing concurrent proceeding regarding those children, whether there has been a past proceeding regarding those children, and the verification of the duty to continuously inform the court if any of the answers to those questions change.
All right, so I know we have like 5 minutes left, and I'm gonna use this momentum to open up the conversation to like some cross topics. In this case, this is something that came up all the time, and this is kind of driving that point of why is it important to identify the type of benefit. And in child support, how is this relevant, Tanisha? Like, if you have a client like Bob, if Bob says, I have SSDI or I have SSI and I have kids, how does this come into play?
It really helps when you have a client that states they have Social Security benefits. You have to drill down on what type of benefits they have, whether it's SSI or SSDI, because as you can see from the chart, one can be garnished for child support and one cannot. And I think it helps when you look at it the way Christina stated, is that SSDI is treated like retirement. So retirement income can be used for income and calculating support for alimony or child support purposes. It can also be garnished for payments of child support or alimony. SSI cannot be garnished. It can be included for income. And also, if the SSI is coming to the child and the parent is the payee, that can be calculated and then contributed back towards the parent's income or the payment amounts when it comes to child support.
This could probably be like a 3-hour webinar. Like if we were to focus on this topic alone, the reason I wanted to bring it up is like it makes a big difference, right? Like sometimes we're just taking case notes and passing this along to the next attorney. It could be a pro bono attorney, and this one letter makes a really big difference here. And I know Adam had to jump off, which kind of goes to that next slide of we have Bob with a potential, whether it's a PI case or even an FCCPA case, and you may be looking at a $15,000 settlement, but this is a client on SSI or this is a client that lives in subsidized housing. And depending on the type of subsidy, this could come into play. So, Christina, this is kind of circling back to our earlier conversation where, there are income and asset limits when it comes to SSI. So if Adam is handling an FCCPA case and he mentions like, well, we're about to get $10,000 to $15,000 as a settlement, how could this impact their SSI?
Right. So if it's SSI, it's because it's a means tested benefit, you're only allowed a certain limit of resources. And if you are over those resources for the month, you are not eligible. So somebody who receives $15,000 settlement, we have this happen, unfortunately, often. We try to refer them to see if there's trust maybe that they can get that money put into so that they don't become ineligible. They also have the ability to spend that funding down within the month and then become eligible again the following month. But for SSDI, that settlement would not matter because it's not a means tested benefit.
And going back to garnishment, one of the reasons I asked Tenesia to talk about child support, typically when we're in consumer world and we have a client who has a debt collection lawsuit against them, and they tell us, yeah, I'm on Social Security, whether it's SSDI, Social Security Retirement, or SSI. For consumer debt purposes, those are protected from garnishment. There are exceptions. Well, one of the exceptions to in this case would be child support, right under those circumstances. But this is why it's so important to identify these key distinctions. Whenever I had a child support related call and they were telling me like, okay, so that is on SSDI, but mom is on SSI, but part of that benefit is really on behalf of the child. It was just, that was going to be like, I'm going to have to put you on hold to figure this out and have to look at that chart that Tenesia shared because it's a really complicated topic. And that's one of the reasons that I brought it up. And Sean, from the housing perspective, subsidized housing perspective, we're either looking at suddenly like an asset influx of $15,000, but we could also be looking at a client who's losing a benefit. How would this be relevant for subsidized housing?
Okay, so if someone got a one-time payment of say around $15,000, it really would not be considered income for purposes of rent calculation, because it's a payment that's temporary, sporadic, or non-recurring. Generally doesn't go into the income calculation. You would just have to look at the rules related to assets, and they tend to be very high. I doubt 15,000 would make the difference, but you just have to look at the asset rules for that specific program. I mean, when we've sued housing authorities for fair housing issues or due process issues, and we've got a judgment or we got a settlement in their favor, and they get a large amount of money, we've had to worry about other types of housing, and what Christina mentioned is exactly what we looked into, either setting up the trust or spending it down, trying to get the money on like the first of a month and make sure they spend it by the end of the month so they wouldn't lose other types of housing or other
For
types of
Social
benefits.
Security purposes, we'd want them to get it on the 2nd of the month, just as a
Okay,
note.
second. Sorry. Okay.
They look at things on the 1st of the month. And so if you have the funding in your account on the 1st of the month, then you'd be over assets. But if you got it on the 2nd and spent it before the end of the month, technically you'd be in the clear.
Okay, good. That's right. Okay. Thanks for that.
All right, so we're 1 minute past our time. I wanted to kind of circle back to that crazy scenario and see how, like, just to show you how these acronyms can make a difference when it comes to issue spotting. We're not, this webinar was not intended to cover all these areas of law, just to kind of create awareness of why it's important to document those case files properly using proper case notes. It helps with communication. I did have a slide for open discussion, so if anybody wants to stay on after the official webinar is done, feel free to stay on. But with that said, I wanted to make sure everybody had the CLE code. Here it's on the screen. It's 2507910N. I'm going to include the CLE code in the email that goes out. I'll include it on the YouTube description. And with that said, this webinar was put with very short notice, and every single team captain said yes. So I am very grateful to all of you that were able to join. Adam, I know, had to jump off. He did warn me about that, but this was great. I'm really looking forward to doing these type of webinars in the future. So I know we have a lot of other topics and a million acronyms to discuss. I'm going to be sharing a document that I started using some of the resources that have been shared, and it's going to be a live document so people can suggest, and we can keep adding to all these acronyms. So I see a lot of thank yous. I know this was a little bit different webinar. I wasn't keeping tally of the points, but I think our winner is Glorian. I don't think anybody can debate that. So Glorian Masiaika, congratulations on being the winner of the first acronym panel. So maybe I'll bring you as a team captain for the next one. So I see a few comments in the chat. But somebody has a question about the CLE. So this was recorded. If we're not able to catch the entire hour of the webinar, you can rewatch the portions of the recording that you were unable to catch, and you can definitely see those. I'm seeing some Spanish acronyms in there. I always love seeing those. So that QM. So yeah, we see that all the time in Spanish. Debbie, thank you. And any final words from our team captains, Sean, Christina, Tenesia?
No, just thanks. Thanks for having me.
Same. Thanks for having me. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you all for joining, and be sure to catch this video and all of our other videos on the YouTube page.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.